It's such a pleasure for me to introduce Vololona Razafimbelo. Most of the time, as many of you know, I'm a Mayanist, but almost all of my linguistics supervisors and mentors have been Austronesianists, for which I feel very fortunate. So from my undergraduate professor, Matt Pearson, to my colleague, Lisa Travis, and others in between. So when it came time to pick a field methods language back last year in spring 2020, I thought it was finally time for me to jump in. And usually I plan on spending at least a couple of months looking for a language consultant. So I wrote to Lisa a few months before the class started, and I think Volol was hired basically the next day. It was a really quick and easy process. And Volol is not just any Malagasy language consultant. So she actually first began teaching Malagasy to non-linguistic researchers, so mostly to anthropologists and geologists who were heading to work in remote parts of Madagascar and needed to have some command of the language. So she was really, she was teaching Malagasy starting in 1996 in Michigan. And then in 2000, she met Elena Paul, who introduced her to the special world of working with linguistic researchers. And so this is where her journey as a language consultant began. In 2008, she moved to Canada, where she started working with Lisa Travis. She's also worked with Matt Pearson. She's worked with many, many people in this Zoom room. We're going to hear some talks later in this session based on work with Volol. And yeah, as I mentioned, she joined my mixed undergraduate, graduate field methods class last spring. And it was really one of my favorite field methods classes that I've been able to teach. And this is entirely due to Volol, who was such an engaging and active participant in the class. And I think part of what made the class so fun is that she so clearly enjoyed the discoveries about her language that she was making along with us along the way. So it was really a lot of fun, and it was extra sad when we had to go virtual due to COVID in March. And I was fully prepared for elicitations to stop then, but Volol hopped right on Zoom and was ready to go when we went virtual. So we were able to finish off the class. The only thing that we didn't get to do is have the fun Malagasy meal at the end, which we hope to be able to do sometime in the future. The summer after, we had so many students interested in continuing that we had a small virtual reading group just to read Malagasy linguistics articles, and Volol wanted to join. So she joined us over the summer too, which was great. So I'm really happy that Volol has agreed to be a speaker at this AFLA, and I'm looking forward to her talk on the other side of the linguist fence, the consultant world. So go ahead and take it away, Volol, or join me in welcoming Volol.
Okay, Manaona, hello everyone. The good thing about these Malagasy greetings is that it applies to good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from here in Montreal. Thank you, Jessica, for the introduction, and thank you, Lisa, for the invitation to speak. So my name is Vololona Razafimbelo, and I'm a native speaker from Madagascar, as well as a Malagasy consultant from McGill. The subject I will be presenting today is new, meaning that it's a topic that has not been discussed in previous AFLA conferences. So far, most, if it is not all, of the talks we heard come from you linguists, from your side. They are very interesting, I admit, but I do not really feel related to all those studies. Therefore, I cannot give like an objective evaluation of the talks, which is normal because I am not a linguist. I am rather that person who sits across from you at the session table. So today, I would like to take you to a journey of exploring my work as a consultant. And this talk meant to be as honest and authentic as it can be. It's not a technical research. There is no evidence for me to demonstrate. There is no test to make. It's just a human side of an experience, more of the flip side of a coin, and this will make this presentation so different. So what would I cover today? What does it look like to be the language consultant? Its challenges, the expectation. Is it important for you in your linguist research? What's the impact of any of my input? And then we can see, is there such thing as a good consultant or not a so good one? And if a linguist had the opportunity to choose, which criteria could we use in his choice? And then if I want to get in a more personal level, what the lesson learned, why after over 20 years, I still enjoy doing it, and what I would have wished I've done better or maybe less, what's frustrating, what's helpful, and at the end, what a linguist should keep in mind when working with us, language consultant. But first, the role of a consultant. Well, I have hard time to define it myself. I remember my first session as Malagasy consultant where I was explained and told my role during the session was to say yes, Métis, or no, Métis. By the way, a special thank you to Eliana Paul, who introduced me to the world of linguist back around the year 2000. So I worked for 1 hour on sentences. Linguists call them data. And here are some examples. Manga nilanch. Nilancha diamang. Nilancha numang. All those sentences means the sky is blue. And I remember at the end of the session, I wonder why in the world someone would be interested in knowing why the sky is blue, or it is the sky which is blue. What's the difference? What the linguist is trying to find out. But not only that, but very often around the dining table with my fellow Malagasy, I have been asked many times what my role as a Malagasy consultant at McGill consists of. And here I am again, giving the example of the sentences, manga nilancha, nilancha diamanga, nilancha numang. And I explained to them that my role was to say yes, Métis, no, tsi Métis, to those sentences. And believe or not, I could see the doubting look in their eyes. Really, can it be that simple? Very hard for them to believe. But then as years went by, I felt comfortable to ask this type of question, which is like, why such studies? And the answer I get in that one is that the linguist is interested in that little word dia, because somehow it exists, or this kind of preposition exists also in another language. So what if it does exist? Well, I couldn't not see the importance. Why spend time and resources to research on dia while all the sentences mean, after all, the sky is blue? But then slowly I accepted the fact that linguists study something for some reason only they know. Well, here another example of how I perceive their study. Nanadino nanit varavarana rakut, which means Rakutu forgot to close the door. And then nanadin fo nananit varavaran rakut. Nanadin nanit fo na varavaran rakut. Nanadin nanit varavarana fon rakut. Nanadin nanit varavarana rakut fon, which means Rakut always forgot to close the door. Two, by the way, two of the sentences are notes he made, but I will not tell you which one because that's not the purposes today. So I just guessed that maybe the studies focused on the place of the adverb fauna, which means always in the sentences. Or maybe the linguist is trying to find out if phone always refers to forget or to close. So therefore, over time, I realized that it is possible to guess the what, but the why would stay obscure to me for quite a long time. And even it's harder to understand that my role would simply consist of something so simple. Over time, though, I must say that the whole thing became some kind of a game where I tried to guess the what is the linguist is studying. So basically, to summarize how to define the consultant role is just to say yes or no to provided data, which would help the linguist to validate his or her data with or without necessarily understanding the why of the study. Now, what's the strength of a consultant versus a linguist? Well, it's my language. I'm born Malagasy. I do not have to study Malagasy. When I come to the sessions, I am allowed to come unprepared because the data is in my head. Part of me, I own them. And that gives the consultant some kind of a position of control and strength. The linguist sitting across from me at that table depends on my knowledge, and he has no idea to know if what I said is right or if what I said is not right. And talking to other Malagasy consultants, we sometimes cannot see why. Simple things, simple data, simple sentences are so hard to the linguist to grasp. So we say, oh, linguists need us. But I know that also that if there were no linguists, there would be no consultant. We are evenly important. Consultants exist because linguists exist. We are just the other side of the coin to each other. This might raise another question. Allow me to raise that question. Then why a linguist would want to know or understand someone else's language? If they are English speaking, wouldn't they only study English? They would have no trouble in checking data, collecting data, proving data, and at least it would save them some time and resources. Well, when I thought more about it, and no offense to all the Malagasy linguists around the world, but I do not think that many Malagasy would want to study or see the importance of why the sky is blue. If not the foreign linguist, no one would study some of those Malagasy structure or syntax. There is another point why I believe that maybe for a foreign linguist to study another language than his own is that the research would be more objective and more scientifically based. Well, because like every science, linguistic is based on observation, not too much on evidence, which can be misleading or cause biased results. But from there, we withdraw the conclusion. So the more objective, the better. And that's what I understood of the importance of my role as consultant, to give that objective perspective in the linguist research. Well, I realize that I am subjective in asking this question, and I don't want to go too deep. I would choose then to leave to answer to this question to the Department of the Linguist as an eventual subject of discussion. Nevertheless, I would bring a suggestion. The best would have the foreign linguist learn the language he studies. So then people around me ask, why are you doing this? Well, there are lots of satisfaction, great satisfaction that I experienced all these years. To me, one of the satisfaction consists of sharing the culture along with the language, sharing my heritage, understanding that behind a language, there are people who bring a culture, and that culture is unique. And let me give you some examples. For example, sulumaso means glasses. Sulu means to replace. Masu is the eye. Isn't this glasses a real replacement of our sight? Replacement of the eye? Yes. Same with rano mighty, which ink. Rano is mind, water is black. Well, that black liquid is really the ink. And the tear, rano masu. Rano is water, masu is eye. We talk about water in eyes because the tear is really the water of the eye. And I love this one. Masu Andrew is the sun. Masu is Andrew, and Masu is I, and Andrew is the day. So the sun comes up here as the eye of the day. And same with Chanukala spider web. Chanu is the house, and wouldn't be the Chanukala, the house of the spider. I am amazed of so much wisdom behind the construction of these words. Our ancestors didn't have Google, but just wise, plain common sense. And they were able to construct all those many Malagasy words. And my joy is to share that cultural riches behind my language. Also, I left my country over 35 years ago, and working with linguists helped me to stay Malagasy. It kind of reinforced in me my sense of identity, realizing that I am and I will be and always be Malagasy. And to you linguists, I owe you that. Another thing somehow is that I feel honored to contribute to research, your research, linguist research, which try to build bridges between people and culture, sharing the same family of language and roots. I know in the family of Austronesian languages, when we do a research, 386 million people are affected. So even if my input allows me to build 1 millimeter of that bridge, I would be more than content. And that's what brings me a great satisfaction to participate in some of those studies. But then comes also the challenges. So I will take the next few minutes talking about our challenges, fear we do have, and through the solution we propose, maybe find some criteria on how you could choose the best consultant who fits you. The first challenge is, what if you do not know? You're not sure if it is wrong or true. And that's the biggest fear of a consultant. I know the linguist will try to ask over and over again the same sentence. They use different angles to see if your answer will vary or not. And that is where the challenge is. So let me give you an example. Tapaina aminiansi nien. Tapaina aminiansi nien. Tapaina amna ansinien. Tapaina amna ansinien. Tapaina ansinien. They all mean the meat is cut with a knife. Well, by the way, 3 of these sentences are no. See, mate, I'll let you figure out which one. But then you're not sure if it is Amini, Amina, Amina, and because they all sound right. So what do you do? What do you tell the linguist? Well, I believe Honesty is the key to a good consultant. The best thing is just to say, I do not know. We talked earlier about the fact that consultant can be a complete stranger. But the difference with the experienced one is this ability to recognize that sometimes you just do not know. Well, that's an humbling, kind of humbling experience, but a necessary one. Well, you also feel some kind of guilt, you're a little bit stressed because it just bothers you that it is your language and you do not know. It's not easy to accept. Well, the best thing to do would be to request a second opinion. You know, when the linguist is wrong, it's okay because it's not his language. But when consultants make mistakes, he kind of takes it personal. I know he shouldn't, but it took me years before I could accept the fact. The second challenge is the difference between the spoken versus the written. Well, there is one example here. Fantatru means I know. And fantatry is the right grammatical correct version. But everyone talks when they speak, when they say I know, it's fantaku. So we have a difference between the spoken and the written. So what do you tell the linguist? How should we pronounce the words since they do not even sound the same in writing and in speaking? Same with amini, which means with, but everyone say amina. So how do we deal with it? Well, because we speak the language, but it's not all consultants that we will be aware of the grammar or the rules behind. Well, I believe a good consultant will not try to change the way the word or not to try to say it as the English or French say it, but just as a Malagasy word would sound. That's why my name is Vulul, not Vololona Razafimbelo, but Vulul Razafimbelo. Another challenge is the context. Many linguists do not give us enough information on the context, and that's normal because they cannot grasp yet the subtleties of the language. But then here is an example. Tafavoan'ny rasoa ny varavarana. Voavoan'ny rasoa ny varavarana. Both means Rasu was able to open the door. But what's the purpose of the study here? The purpose of the study is to understand the difference between voa and taf. Well, voa means the action is completely done. And tafa means focuses more on the struggle Rasu had to open the door. So if the linguist doesn't explain nicely what he wants, then it will affect the result of his study. The next challenge we have is what when it's grammatically correct, but it's not culturally suited. The grammar is fine, but then it's not the way we say it. And here is a first example. This example is on a currently ongoing research, so I cannot talk too much about it. Mankahala jerena ny zaza, the child hates to be watched. You know it is wrong, but you cannot figure out why it's wrong because grammatically it is right. Let's see the other example. Futsi varavarana rasu. Rasu doesn't like to stay home. But then when you add futsi varavarana rasu umali, it has no meaning at all. Doesn't mean anything at all. So how the consultant will react? Okay, let's change futsi varavarana to visana. Visana means tired. Visana rasu. Visana rasu work nicely. Visana rasu umali. Umali means yesterday works. So why does it work with visana and why it doesn't work with futsi varavarana? They're both grammatically correct, but we cannot say futsi varavarana rasu umal. It doesn't make any sense. So those are the challenges I believe consultants face working with a linguist. But the last but not the least is, I believe, the biggest challenge is to restrain yourself not to teach Malagasy. Because it's not necessary to share knowledge, but more to trying to get into the shoes of the linguist and try to figure out where he wants to go. And so a good consultant is the one who would be able to open to this perspective. Let me tell you an experience I had. The data is, the sentences is tia mama kibuki rakutu and tia vakin rakutu nibuki, which is Rakutu loves to read. I did a survey, and I went to a few consultants and wrote down their answer. Some of them said, well, tell us first what's the context. What kind of book Rakut wants to read? Does he like to read? Well, that's not a so good consultant. And then there is some who say, well, listen, the first one, Tima Makbuke Rakutu, is good sentence, mate. Okay, yes. Tia Vakindra Kutuni Buki, mate, no, that's a good consultant. But what makes the difference, the experienced consultant would pick up that the active voice works and the passive or agent doesn't. And why? It took me time before I realized that, in fact, because Buki doesn't love to be read by Rakut, just doesn't make sense. But also an experienced consultant would even try to understand that maybe you're not studying the active voice versus the agent voice, but just maybe the function of Tia. So those are the three kind of consultant we can have. There is one last thing to consider. You know, the linguist will take time afterwards to process the results of your yes and no. The linguist. The linguist will go home, will go through all your answers, yes and no, and he will take time to process all those data. The consultant, no. For 1 hour, his brain will not stop working. Well, when the topic is easy, such as the sky is blue, then no stress. But it can sometimes get complicated. So you try to give the linguist enough data to process for a longer period of time. That the consultant does not have that time, and that might affect the result, because it might make the consultant feel more insecure, because there is higher risk of not to be consistent. I tried to summarize then, is there such thing as a good consultant or a not so good one? Well, I would say there is an experienced consultant who understands the purpose of the study instead of teaching the language. And the challenge is to master that difference and to restrain yourself from it. From it is the hard part. You have tendency of teaching, but it's not teaching. And then the experience consultant would have the honesty, should not be afraid to say, I do not know, which is, as we saw, a kind of humbling experience. The experienced one would be open to what the linguist wants to know more than to impart what he knows. It's definitely not necessarily a sharing knowledge. It's more to get into the linguist's shoes and try to see where he wants to go. And then we have the teacher versus consultant. Teaching is to impart the knowledge of you acquired, but consulting is more to impart knowledge you already own. So I hope that today's talk help you to see my work as consultant, as we stand on the oversight of the fence. During those 20 years of experience, I realized more and more that it's a give and take relationship, and it was rewarding. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all linguists to have given me the opportunity to serve you and to be your consultant. I realize that consultant is important to linguists. But because, as I said, this is not a research paper, it's more of a sharing of experience. It's a panel of discussion, like a moment we take to share. I will try to finish a little earlier than it requested, and I would like you as a linguist to tell me what are some of your expectations, what to expect from us consultants. And were there some circumstances where you were disappointed? I would like to hear from you as well. To conclude is, the linguist is technical. He sees the data. The consultant considers more the human side of a relationship. I see it a big difference. At the end of a session, the linguist would say, wow, that was a great research, very interesting paper. But the consultant at the end of the session would say, he or she was very nice. I really love to work with him or her. Well, at that table, we sit across from each other. I am at the other side of the fence. I am, as a consultant, more people-oriented. But when I think of the purpose of the linguist study, at the end, there are people as well. So we can reach across that table because after all, we are all people. Thank you, Ms. Saucha.
Thank you, Volol, for this wonderful talk. So just a reminder, you can use the raise hand function to either ask a question or to respond to some of the questions that Volol posed for us, or you can type into the chat window and I can read it out loud for you. And so we're on the other side of the table now, so don't be shy, everybody. Matt, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Vololona, for this talk. Sota Betsaka. I have a comment, a question, and an answer for you. My comment is, first of all, thank you so much for giving this talk, and thank you to the organizers of AFLA for having the brilliant idea to ask a consultant to present their side of the story. That's a voice that we don't hear as much as we should. And I think it would be a great idea for you to potentially, if you're interested, write up this talk as something that maybe could be published in a linguistics source. This would be the kind of thing that I think would be an excellent contribution to a field guide for linguistics, for linguists. When we're learning field methods, when we're teaching our students how to do field methods, we want to not only give them our perspective on how it is that that we can work effectively with a consultant, but also the consultant's perspective. So that's my comment. My answer to your question about what I think makes a good consultant is, I mean, I've got a number of answers to that question, but the first one that occurred to me is I like it when a consultant both gives me a quick answer and a slow answer to a question. So I like it when I present a consultant with data, they will give me a snap judgment without thinking about it. But then they'll also take some time to think about it. I think both, and that might cause them to change their mind about whether they find a particular sentence meti or tsimeti, or they might change, they might, a particular context where you could use a sentence might occur to them when they think about it. And I think both kinds of information are valuable to the linguist. Sort of knowing the first thing that pops into your head when you hear a sentence is very valuable, but I think also having you reflect on this is also very valuable. I always tell the anecdote of one of the Malagasy consultants that we worked with in Antananarivo. I was working on a pair of sentences that were two different ways of saying he tried to put the car in the garage, and she accepted both of them. And I asked her, well, what's the difference between them? And she was silent for about 2 or 3 minutes thinking about it. And then finally she said, I've got it. Okay, so in both cases, he tried but failed to put the car in the garage. And if you say it this way, the reason he failed is because the car wouldn't start. But if you say it this other way, the reason he failed is because the garage was too small.
Wow.
And that was like, I had, fireworks coming out of my head when I heard that. I love those kinds of ways in which people can be thoughtful about their language. And then I have a question for you. I mean, other people can answer your question first, but the question that I have for you is your talk focused a lot on sort of giving advice to consultants, kind of what consultants should know that will enable them to work effectively with linguists. But I want to know also, in your experience, what you think linguists could do better than we do. What ways could we improve the ways in which we work with consultants that you think would make the experience more useful and more useful for the consultant, and also more enjoyable for the consultant?
When I go through all those challenges, the basic is we feel embarrassed when we have to change our answer, and we feel stressed because it's our language and we make mistakes. And many times I wish the linguist would give some reassurance or make sure we understand that it's okay to change the answer, or it's okay to that it's not right. And I had this week that experience. I got an email, and the email said, you said this was correct, was meti. But then when I look at it, oh man, I said meti, but this is not tsimeti. And I felt bad. So maybe you should explain at the end that it's okay for us, even if sometimes it's made and then we changed thinking about it and it becomes timid. That's the biggest, one of the most important language should send across message you send across to us as consultant. So you were never disappointed when you work with consultant?
Are you asking me?
Asking all of you? Never? Because if you were never disappointed, then there is no such thing as good or not so good. Because all of them, all the kind work for you. I mean, I'm asking the question.
Can I say something
Elena,
here?
go ahead.
Ileana?
Yeah, so I don't think I would call it disappointed. I think that's not the word I would use. At least for myself, I recognize that this work that a consultant does is not easy, and not everyone is suited to that kind of work. So sometimes some people just don't, and that's fine, you know. It's disappointing in the sense that, you know, but not critical of the individual, I guess. I think the main thing is, and it's something you alluded to, is a lot of times if you start explaining what the person just wants to say matey to all the sentences. They just, because they don't want to disappoint you in saying, oh, you made a bad sentence.
Yes, that's too true. But it's interesting that you say that you think it's not easy and not everyone is suited to do the job of consultant. But I thought linguists think it's easy because it's our language. I've always thought that you think it's natural, normal for us to know Malagasy because we're born Malagasy. But then it's interesting, you said, I know it's not easy for you. Oh, that's new to me.
Tyler Lemon, go ahead.
I guess just as a comment, I mean, there are a lot of times where I'm listening to a talk on something in English, and there's a very complicated conversational context that has to establish the background, and then it's like, okay, now in this context, you can say this very complicated sentence, and I'll be staring at it like in the handout for like several minutes, like, okay, set this up, do this, okay, now I get it. So that for me is like the closest thing to being a consultant, and I imagine that is equally difficult for people on the other side when linguists are trying to give them some background and asking them if the sentence is okay or not. So at least as a linguist, usually if I try to create a context and the consultant is having a hard time giving me a yes or a no, I tend to blame myself for not doing a good enough job of explaining what I'm going for, rather than thinking, oh, this is a bad consultant. Instead, I think, no, I'm doing a bad job of asking my question to the consultant. But that's just my perspective on it.
Wow. Well, this makes this discussion very interesting because, oh, that's how you feel. Wow. Thank you.
Mathieu, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, well, I was going to say something very similar to Tyler, which is that for me at least, I don't think it's easy at all, because as a linguist, we're used to scratching our heads at judgments for our own native languages when we work on them, and we know just how excruciating things can get when you really get at this marginal ground between, the sentence is not clearly good, it's not clearly bad, and you don't quite know where it goes. So on the contrary, for me, sometimes I feel like I'm evil when when I'm doing field work, like when I'm asking these questions, because I know how torturous it can be to get at these hard to decide sentences. And I know with you in particular, I mean, when we worked together last year, you really think things through. And some of the questions I would ask you, you would write them down and take them home to your family and think about them for a week. So I know just how seriously you took it. So certainly don't think it's an easy job.
I guess I'll also add to this. One thing that I think makes a good consultant is the consultant being patient enough to sit there while I do a bad job trying to explain something, but then gradually do it better and better until the consultant finally understands what I'm going for. So yeah, patience on both sides, I think, is a good thing.
Patience. Well, then I realized that challenges are both sides.
Chris Davis, you have a comment?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't know why I can't find the raise hand function. So here I've raised. Yeah, thanks first of all for the great talk. And I just second what Matt said about, I mean, not to put pressure on you to write things down, but yeah, it would be great for linguists going into the field or to be able to hear this. You had this question, you're saying, hey, are none of you actually disappointed with your consultants? And I think I felt like this sort of social hesitation to admit the truth, which is that probably, yeah, the answer is yeah. It was certainly yeah for me, but I'll follow up that I think the first time when I started doing serious fieldwork about 10 years ago, basically all of my fieldwork was as you described. I was expecting yeses and nos or something like that. And, you know, I would find that some people were really good at, it seemed to be good at providing what I wanted. And others, you know, either would go off on a tangent or I don't know, got bored or, you know, I don't know, just didn't seem to be either interested in it or skilled at it in some way. But my own experience is that over the years, I've kind of, you know, so I've sort of broadened the type of research I do. I've basically, I don't know, I would say maybe there's 4 skills that consultants might have or not have to different degrees. One is that yes-no skill. Another is this sort of ability to come up with different contexts where sentences might be used or to have kind of insights as to what's actually going on, that kind of meta insight. Another one is some people are not good at either of those, but they're good at telling stories, right? They can just, you can say, hey, can you tell a story in your language, you know, to a non-native speaker sitting in front of you? Yeah, sure. And they can go on for as long as you might like. So you can get a corpus from those people. And then there's other people who are good at, they can't do grammaticality judgments or they're not interested in it or whatever. But if you have a corpus, like you have, I'm talking about languages, working on endangered languages that, you know, the speakers are quite elderly and, you know, maybe there's a impetus to get lots of recordings transcribed quickly. Some speakers they can't tell a story on their own. They're not very good at the grammaticality judgments. But if you have a recording and you say, hey, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? They're really good at translating that language back into whatever your lingua franca is, right? So I felt like early on I was just disappointed and I would go, this one, you know, I need to keep good social relations, but actually this person, nothing, whatever happens when I go to their house. But then I would discover, actually, this person's really good at telling stories and I should just use that and turn on the recorder and I'll have like an hour-long monologue about life before tractors or something. And anyway, so like this is sort of where I am now, is that I've sort of come to find that, different consultants are good at different things. And if you sort of tailor what you're doing to what they're good at, then you can make everyone happy and have an efficient use of time. And anyway, long comment, but that's sort of been my experience.
Thank you. Well, I wrote down all the 1, 2, 3, 4 expectation you have from us, and I agree. And maybe one thing is the purpose, for example, of telling story and translating and giving context and insight is to pass on the culture. And that's where over those years, I loved the most. It's not the technical part too much. It's this stories, the insight, how Malagasy will think. Because in my opinion, if you understand how we think, you will understand the subtleties of the language. Well, it doesn't mean you have to learn Malagasy. Okay.
Other questions, comments? Talis.
Alice and Lisa.
Hi, Volol. Thank you for the talk. That was just incredible. It's really great to hear this experience in such a complete fashion. I don't think I've ever really felt disappointed in the consultant, but there have been moments where I've realized that I've gotten essentially nothing from a whole session. And at that point, that's almost a great point, I think, because now I can figure out what's going wrong. So it's never been a feeling of, and also I should say that I've only ever had the opportunity to work with one incredibly experienced consultant. Thank you, Volol. But I've always felt like and this might be a bit what Chris was saying, that you can get something, but if it's not what you're expecting, then you can change what you're looking for. But it's not always easy getting there, certainly, and I feel like there's hard work on both sides, and some of that work is kind of maybe invisible. I feel like a lot of the time, you said that when consultants go home at the end of the day, they're done. But often you have come back to sessions and said, actually, I thought about it and I asked people, this doesn't work. And I feel like there's just as much work going on behind the scenes for the consultant as the linguist.
What do you mean when you said there were some sessions where you got nothing? What do you mean? Because I worked with you. What do you mean?
There are days where I've had a whole set of sentences, and at the end of it, something's not working, and I realize, oh, I've got the wrong sentences here. This is not, and that's on my end, where because of the answers I've gotten and because of the responses that you've given, I realize that my approach just isn't right. And that's great, but it means that I have to essentially start whatever I was doing over.
But I had no idea that your sentences were wrong. So that's the communication is. For me, linguists have never wrong sentences. Oh, okay. Good to know. Okay, thank you.
Lisa. Oh,
so I'll just
Lisa,
start by commenting on what Talis said. We hit dead ends. So, but we have to find those dead ends. I mean, part of what we do is, and then we point them out to other people, hopefully, so that they don't go down the same dead end. So yeah, there's certain sessions we have where we just keep bumping against a wall, and then you go back and you say, oh, okay. So certainly, so it's as important. So getting nothing is important. So getting nothing is something. So, we've learned something. We always learn something. So I think that's good. And maybe keep our frustration from you.
Oh, but how would the consultant know that you got nothing?
No, we got something. It's just, we say, oh, great, we're going to go in this direction. It's going to take us somewhere great. Well, no, there's a wall there. That we have to know that. So, maybe our optimism has been, dimmed a bit, but it's important. It's as important as the things that work, so the things that don't work. I think that's what you're saying. But I also wanted to tell a story, because I was talking to Vololona about this before, is that I think one of the best things for us is to have been a consultant, and know how inconsistent we are in our own native languages. So my story is I was Jim Huang's office mate when he was writing his thesis. So this will mean something to other people. When he was doing adjunct extraction out of WH Islands, and he's not a native speaker of English, and I am. I was not consistent. the thesis, I mean, he checked and checked and checked and checked, but it is a very, it is kind of a funny thing to think you're very certain one day and then not so certain, 2 weeks later. So I think it's a good lesson for all of us to, and humbling, yes, but all of us have to be aware of that.
Maybe a last question or comment from Tyler?
I was just going to
before we head
follow
to a
up,
break.
say that when we say that we got nothing, what we often mean is we ask for sentences, the consultant will say if they're good or bad, and then we might not understand the reason at the time for why the sentence is good or bad. And like maybe we have a different idea, but we realize that we didn't take something into account, and therefore the judgments that we got are not helpful for the analysis that we're working on. But they're still good data because they still tell us about like what new factors we have to consider when we analyze something. So it's not that the consultant is not helping us at all. They're still very helpful. It's just that we as the linguists forgot to think about something before asking for the sentences and how to interpret them.
Deciding what to ask is not always easy.
Yeah, that's the challenge of the linguist. Yes.
Okay, and I'll just use my chair privilege maybe to answer your question quickly about what makes a good consultant. And I think, to my mind, one of the most important things is somebody that's interested in their language and that is excited about making these discoveries along the way. And I think that, as I mentioned at the beginning, is what has made you such an excellent consultant to so many linguists over the years. So thank you again for this talk. Let's all thank Volol.
Misautra, Misautra,
Misautra.
Misautra.
And we have a break now, so we'll reconvene at 15 minutes after whatever your next hour is, wherever you are. Oh, unless, Talis, are you in that half-hour time zone? Well, in about, no, you're not. Okay, good. In 15 minutes, please come back when we will restart this session. So we'll see you after the break. And just a reminder that you can use the Slack channels to continue the discussion.